Welcome to this interview with Professor Dr. Ken McCluskey. Ken McCluskey is the former Dean and Professor of Education at the University of Winnipeg. He is known internationally for his work in several areas, including mentoring ADHD, gifted education, and at-risk children and youth, where his lost prizes and related projects serve as models worldwide for those interested in identifying and developing the talents of marginalized young people. Before joining University of Winnipeg, Ken had 20 years experience as a psychologist, special educator, and administrator in the public school system. He has received major program development, creativity, distinguished service, and publication awards from the Canadian Council for Exceptional Children, the International Center for Innovation in Education, ICIE, the World Council for Gifted and Talented Children, and Reclaiming Youth International, along with his institution's teaching research, governors, and community service awards. He is a popular keynote and invited speaker. He has written over 100 professional articles and chapters, and he is the author, co-author, or editor of more than 20 books, including Understanding ADHD, Our Personal Journey, and Lost Prizes, Identifying and Developing the Talents of Marginalized Populations. In addition, he is the co-founder of the International Journal for Talent Development and Creativity, IJTDC. Welcome again to this unique interview with Professor Dr. Ken McCluskey. Okay, so we will come to the first question. Of course, I will introduce you first of all, making the short biography, and also will become part of the interview later on when I do the editing, and we will make the video in the way it should be. So the first question is, will you please explain to us your personal and academic experience with ADHD?
Okay, well, let me digress right from the beginning, because I transferred some things into the area. My background was in psychology, experimental psychology. But growing up, I was, now this is back when the dinosaurs walked the face of the earth, right? Like we're talking a long, long time ago. But I was an early entrant student when they didn't have many. So I was put into kindergarten early. It wasn't a big deal like they make it now with the formal testing and that. But I had the opportunity. So I went in a year early. And then when I got to grade 4, at the end of grade 4, all the students in our division, our school district, were tested, and on the basis of what was probably an invalid test, who knows, but they whisked us off, so to speak, and we were put in what they called a made-to-work class. This was around the time of Sputnik. The Russians had sent Sputnik, so I don't, 58, somewhere like that.
Yes.
And the Americans got spooked. They were afraid they were falling behind in math and science. So they launched these schools. Canada, of course, copied and emulated it. And ours wasn't math or science. It was just everything. But they called them made work classes. So I was in a segregated gifted class for a long time, the rest of my schooling. And then when I was taking my PhD, since I had lived the gifted stuff and I was interested, they became part of my candidacy exam. So in the early 70s, right, was looking at gifted from as it was emerging. So the World Council in 1975 was sort of born, and all these things were happening. And I was off in a little school division in Canada, but I was hearing all this, and it was an exciting time. Then I wanted to get out of the ivory tower and make a difference in the world. So I shifted into schools and became a school psychologist, which was different because that really wasn't my training, but I did some upgrading and catching up. And suddenly I find myself working with kids, and a few years later I was named the coordinator of special services. So then that person is the director of every bad thing that happens in the school district crosses your desk. Every referral would come in to me, and I have a team of social workers, psychologists, etc., that I headed up. And so that means with referrals, from a practical point of view, we had many ADHD referrals. And as time went by, it became more of a buzzword, a hot item. And soon everybody had ADHD. So we were getting countless referrals, some legitimate, some not. But we were working with a lot of kids. So from a professional point of view, that would be from kindergarten to grade 12. It's not just me, of course, but our team, with me supervising and seeing a number of kids myself, was working directly with ADHD kids. Now, but more important than that, is, as you know, our daughter Amber became sort of almost the poster child for ADHD in our part of the world. She was extremely extreme and was just living with it. It's not just that I was seeing it at work, I was living with this. And she was one of the more extreme ADHD people to come along. So I saw it from both the teacher side, the psychologist side, and the parental side. So that sort of sums up where I'm coming from with that.
And how does ADHD affect parenting?
Sorry?
How does ADHD affect parenting?
Oh, a good question right off the bat. Well, what happened, I'll have to backtrack a bit. Again, as you know, Tazir, it was an instant family for me. Andrea, my wife, was a single mom when we met, and she had the two children who were very young. Chris must have been about 3, he was the oldest, and then Amber was a year younger, and when I came upon the scene. But although I was involved from early on, we didn't get married until Amber was, I guess, 7 maybe, because having seen her in action, I was old enough to know what I was getting into. And this kid was just sort of wired. I've never seen anything like it. It was just terrible pressure, because in the beginning, it was, her behavior was so extreme, it was life-threatening. I mean, she would climb anything, play on the playground apparatus in schools, rather than swinging on it, she would try to run on the top of these things. You recall the incident we've talked about where in the first day of grade 2, I was going to the playground to watch her. She was going to a new school, and I was worried she'd have trouble in recess because she's so hard to keep track of. So I came out to just watch. I was going to watch her for the first week every recess to make sure she was okay. And but just as I was leaving, the phone rang, and I was delayed. So I was a minute or two late, not very late at all. And then I'm looking for Amber though, and she was already missing in action. I found the grade 2 class, her grade 2 class, but she wasn't there. When I finally tracked her down, she had ran out of the schoolyard, and they have the electric wires. She had climbed up and was just ready to go hand over hand down the wires. And what you do as a parent, I didn't want to scare her, but so I said, Amber, I'd like to talk to you. Can you come down, please? And then she came down, and it was all right. But what do you do with that? I'm the kind of person, by temperament, I think, and certainly by upbringing, who never ever believed in spanking children. I absolutely do not believe in that. Never believed in it until I got Amber. But what do you do? And I still don't believe in that. I think you're modeling aggression and violence, and we ought not to do that. But what do you do if a kid's behavior is so threatening to self and others? And it got somewhat better. It became less extreme as she got older, but it was always there, this overactivity, this impulsivity. And it wears you out. You couldn't have her get her driver's license until she would, if she's driving a car, she would be looking out different windows. If there was a sunroof, she'd look there. If there's a house she's interested, she just turns and drives across the street and so it was 20 before she got her license, and 23 before we could let her drive in the car by herself. So either Christopher or Andrea or I would have to be with her. And so there's just example after example there of just extreme. So on the one side, it was very tiring and wearing, it was exhausting. But on the other side, it was incredibly rewarding, because you had a little girl who was so lonely, and she needed help, and she needed somebody, and she had no friends, and she couldn't read, and she was behind in school, and she couldn't concentrate. And so we worked together as a family to there, but it's always with you. I mean, she still makes me nervous. She's what, 45 or 46, for heaven's sakes, and you still never know. She was in the hospital recently with a life-threatening ailment, not COVID-19, but she had a very serious problem. And I go in there, and she had been in an isolation room. I was the only person who could come and visit. And she had looked out the door and saw the cleaning staff were, busy cleaning everything down. So to help them when she's in life-threatening condition in bed, she gets out of bed. You can't keep her down. She cleans the room. She washes the floor. She's doing this and things that she ought not have been doing. But anyway, so in the end, I guess it's turned out I wouldn't change anything, but I wouldn't want to do it again either.
And do you think, what are the main causes for ADHD? Is it like inherited from the parents, or it is something else?
You know, it's so hard to know. I mean, I think it's everything. I mean, I certainly think heredity is involved. In her case, you can almost see it because her mother is somewhat that way, and her grandfather is like, he's 93 years old now and still running. I played 5 games of golf with him on one day, and he was not young. And so what happens is that, it interacts. So let's say you have, okay, let's take Amber and say there was, inherited characteristics and she's born this way. But if she were in a home with me, who am fairly laid back and quieter and calm, and we can listen to music, and there's not a lot of yelling and screaming and fighting. It's a fairly sedate home where it's going to turn out much different than if she were in a home where there was yelling, fighting, screaming, and chaos all around her. So you get both things, you know, interaction of that, and many. I think the best way to say it is with ADHD, nothing is simple. It's not, you're always looking for individualizing, and each child will be bringing something different to the table. But certainly from my perspective, there are definite genetic factors.
But what factors might increase the risk?
Sorry?
What factors may increase the risk to get ADHD?
Well, I guess environment is, genes are genes. Heredity is sort of what it is. And right now, I mean, we're getting to the point where we can modify some things, but right now it's still, it's more or less, it is what it is. So you're looking at environmental factors. Some people say it's diet, though when you really look at that literature, it's not all that supportive, certainly not equivocal literature. Now I've got to be careful because I'm sure food affects us. We are what we eat, right? And I'm sure bad diets make a difference. So if you're living in some of the Canadian communities up north where they're isolated on winter roads, you can't get in there, stuff is flowing in, and the meat and the vegetables are flowing in Saturday and they're gone by Wednesday, and for the rest of the week kids are having soft drinks and potato chips and all things with a shelf life of 1,000 years. And that I'm sure makes a difference. But the idea that it's, you know, different substances, different chemicals is not proven. So you have to be cautious with that. But also, to me, the environment is a huge factor, and sometimes, but again, if a child's on, and I'm not pro or con medication, I sort of stand in the middle of that issue. But kids, if they're on medication and it does slow them down, that then makes it more possible for some of the environmental effects like metacognitive strategies and problem solving and different things may be more likely to work, so they're interacting. So I think there's interaction in causation, and I think there's interaction in good remediation or intervention, let's say.
And at what age does ADHD peak?
Well, there's a lot of different opinions on that. Some people think that it's a disorder of childhood, and you certainly do. See, there's so many individual cases that are different. Sort of anything goes. But a lot of people believe that ADHD is there, and it certainly hits early years, very early, and goes through childhood and often adolescence. It's usually there. Our experience, though, with Amber is, although over the years the ADHD manifests itself in different ways, right? It was still there. I mean, it was there through the lifespan. So many will argue convincingly that this is a disorder of the lifespan, and you have it in changing form, like we change in many ways, but it's an issue all the way through. Amber still is, well, okay, when her behavior became more safe, but when she became a young mother, we had the only child I've ever heard of, the only mother I've ever heard of, Amber, who would wake the babies up to play. She needed that stimulation. Now that she's a school teacher in her own right, she's all over the place. She's with her kids every recess, at lunch hour, outside, inside, going the energy that caused a lot of trouble for her. And when she was so impulsive, now you're seeing some of the good sides to it. The energy is becoming a strength in her job, but the ADHD is still with her. So I'd say it may be harder to cope with when kids are young, but and I'm sure there are cases that spontaneously stop and they're not ADHD anymore, or something works and they're fine. But most of the time, my guess is that the ADHD is a lifelong issue.
And will you please shed some light on symptoms and diagnosis?
Well, symptoms are, it's interesting. Okay, I'm trying to say, a lot of people want tests for everything.
Yes.
But but this is a hard thing to test for. There are some efforts, mostly, in my opinion, invalid approaches. I think the best method is observation. And if a sensitive observer has some background and training in what to look for, I think we become better than most of the tests. And of course, you can still use testing in combination. But in terms of characteristics, you get the, I'm searching for a word here, the overactivity, the obvious thing. I'm getting,
yeah, sure.
You have my sip here. There, you get overactivity where they're just all over the place. Kinsborn, one of the researchers, said it's as if they were driven by a motor. Okay. Now you have to be careful because in DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, they talk about various kinds of ADHD. So ADHD, predominantly hyperactive impulsive type, ADD, predominantly inattentive type, ADD combined type, that would be Amber, and there's even it's ADHD, not ADD, ADHD. Okay, combined type, and then if not otherwise specified, they have a loose category. If you don't know where to put it, you can fit it in somewhere. So the ADHD is defined in there, they point to other points, the inattention component, where you may be able to keep their bodies still with certain kids, but their minds wander. So like mine is doing now. So it, you're looking at all sorts of behaviors where they just can't focus, they can't concentrate, which, has implications for school. Distractibility is another sign that goes hand in hand with that. The impulsivity I've mentioned, where you just do things without thinking. One of the characteristics of ADHD that you find, it's very common in most of the questionnaires and scales that are trying to assess ADHD, there's usually lying. These kids often lie. And that's certainly true with Amber, and I believe that to be true. But I don't think it's because they're evil or wicked children. I think what happens, well, if you or I were about to tell a lie, we have the impulse control to say, oh, well, that's wrong, I shouldn't do that, and you stop yourself. Or maybe that's naive. We may have the impulse control to say, hey, you know, this is a stupid lie. I'm going to get caught. I have to think of a more cogent untruth. Okay, something better. Lacking that control, these kids blurt out the first thing that comes to mind, and it's often patently ridiculous and indeed sets them up for ridicule. Okay, so that impulsivity is a big thing. The excitability where they're and disorganization. Boy, these kids lose everything. Their parents in the early years in school will live at the lost and found. That's an issue. So you've got those kind of characteristics, but you also have sort of secondary characteristics. So not always, but usually these kids will have learning problems in school. It kind of makes sense. If you can't concentrate, if you can't sit still, you usually don't learn what you're supposed to learn. So Amber learns all sorts of things by osmosis almost. She could tell you when she was in grade 2 what's in the bottom of the drawers in the classroom, the cupboards, what the posters are, how many tiles there are on the ceiling. She'd know all that, but she'd never know anything she's supposed to know. So that is an issue. You almost always have poor peer relations. Relationships are an issue because these kids, the impulsivity works against them. Let's say if they're playing a game of baseball and you're supposed to, sometimes you have to wait for 2 balls or 3 balls and 2 strikes. What if you can't wait? And if you're like Amber, you're swinging before the ball's even pitched. You know, the other kids don't enjoy that. You have stresses on the family. So you can look for family dynamics and usually a low self-concept. There's one psychologist who actually will not make a diagnosis of ADHD unless the kid is in emotional pain. I think that's standard and it comes with the disorder. So the low self-concept with not having friends, not being invited to birthday parties, not being a part of things, have, you know, there's an effect. You had a second half to that question. That was the primary.
We are talking about the symptoms and diagnosis, but you already covered also the issue of diagnosis.
Very quickly.
Yes.
Some people use some of the subtests of the WISC, but I would argue that the WISC doesn't even measure intelligence, so I don't think we should be moving it over into another domain. To me, the WISC measures experience. And so, but anyway, that's as it is. Some people will use it. They have a lot of rating scales. The most well-known are by Connors. So there's Connors rating scales. Now those are, everybody thinks they're magical. They're not. They're just subjective. Somebody just makes them up. But it's sort of subjective objectivity. It guides you through the process and you get a feeling for what to look for. And the scales, if, you know, we like using things in combination. So if there's a doctor involved, they would be meeting with the school personnel and would be reviewing the tests and the Connors and would be including the teacher in the observations and the parents to see if things are the same at home and at school. And to my mind, they usually are. People are having a difficult time with the child, no matter what the setting is. Not always, but mostly. So, but really, cooperation is important in all things. But I think with ADHD, in the diagnosis and in the attempts to intervene, it becomes essential. You want people collaborating and working together.
And do you think there is enough cooperation in this area? I mean,
Well,
between medical
no,
doctors, for example, psychologists, parents, and so on.
I don't think so, but I'm not saying that in a blaming way. There's an awful lot of referrals and a lot of demands on the system, so you can't always get everything you ought to have. But in schools, good schools usually will have their crisis teams, and you will have some people there and their resource teachers, your CERT, special education resource teachers would be in there. So you bring a measure of expertise and you bring an administrator, and what happens here?
It is running well.
Yeah, I don't know what's happened if you're having the same thing, but okay. Huh, I did something right on Zoom, hallelujah. And so basically they're there, and many of the doctors or psychiatrists we've worked with make a point of trying to get out and staying in touch, and the family doctors often are able to. So while I don't think the diagnosis is as comprehensive as possible, or as we would like, it's still, people are making a legitimate effort. But see, this is where things get complicated. I'll say something that what some people would find unpopular, but parents of ADHD kids, some of them you have to see them, they're wonderful. Their kids are so difficult. They maintain focus on the behavior. They love the child despite the, difficult behavior and the challenges. And they may join groups, but they get good information from the Learning Disability Association, local. They may join a committee and work with other parents, but they balance it. They balance it. There are some parents who have a need to have an ADHD child, whether the child is ADHD or not. They go to doctors and almost force the diagnosis. Convincing parents I've seen many children who clearly were not ADHD that have that diagnosis because the parent pushed for it, and the doctor in a short period of time, and it can't, it didn't have that kind of background to make the call. So that's difficult. And there's others who they have a need, the parents have a need to have a special needs child. So that they go to all these meetings and they go here and they're all over the place and they're lobbying for this and, looking for that and advocating for this and that, but spending no time with their kid. And sometimes the time spent advocating might be better spent with the child. So it's a pleasure when you see the parents who balance that and work together, but it can be a stress on the system and much more difficult when you have those situations. But in the school, you are faced with those kinds of things. It would be naive to think that that doesn't happen. So there's many false diagnoses of ADHD, but there's many that are appropriate and well acted upon, and a good team and good parents change the child's life for the better. So complicated as always.
And I think you make the balance, or you made the balance. And also you contributed to this field of knowledge as other fields by writing a book about ADHD. So you managed with Amber, you managed to also to disseminate knowledge and to write a book about also ADHD.
Yeah, we started to talk. Amber would have been maybe 15 when I talked about ADHD for the first time, and I just did it in an in-service session that we were doing. And then a few months later, we talked to Amber about it, and she started speaking about it there. So we were working together, and the book was a joy. We tried to make it optimistic, and Andrea and I, Andy, just started to make presentations to try and help people and parents, because it can be very, very hard. So we made things as light and positive as possible, but not sugarcoating everything, but looking at it. And there were some very positive things that happened. Amber, when she was teaching, had our book up on her shelf, and one of the little kids in there said, "My mummy has that book." And Amber said, "Oh." So anyway, they were talking about it. The mother came in and said, "Well, what's this book?" And there's the picture, and Amber said, "Well, that's me." She said, "That's me, that's you, and you're teaching my child. And this was my favorite book I've ever read." And it was so exciting that you actually saw where we were able to give somebody hope. So that's that worked out very well. And with your help, we are intending to look at another edition. So I'm just working on that last weekend, and I've got some wonderful art to inject into the mix.
Oh, this is nice. And what is your recommendation for parents first?
For parents, what?
What you recommend, or what are your recommendations for parents of the people who have ADHD?
Yeah, okay, there's maybe, let me think about this for a second. Maybe let me say, I'll give not the usual.
No, based on your experience, because I remember in the workshops you are doing, normally the participants get excited, and also they feel the positive energy, and then you create a hope. Because normally, you know, with parents who have ADHD cases, you feel they are not happy at all, and also they feel sad because of this, case.
Well, then let me answer the question, bearing in mind this would also, with slight modifications, apply to schools too,
Yes.
and teachers, so parents and educators. But one thing they always say, there's always little ideas, like you want to increase and improve communication and between home and school, because if you don't, you'll be spinning as the kid is doing different things in different places, and you want to get a consistency. So one woman had written an excellent book on how to teach and reach the ADHD kid, and she and others have made suggestions. Like one of them, I don't know if it came from her, but it came from somebody, said all the kids today wear backpacks to school. So if it's a youngster, ADHD, remember they're disorganized, they lose everything, they lose their notes, right? So what there is, they dedicate one pouch in that backpack for the note. So when the teacher has a note to send home, wants to get a message across, writes a quick note for the parent, puts it in that pouch. Kid goes home, parent knows where to look for it and answers in that pouch. So you're looking that way. Structure. So often it is inconsistent. So they say, give the kids small chunks of information. Don't say, I want you to run into the bedroom, grab the pillow, change the pillow sheet, go down, make sure everything's clean, bring it back and give it to your dad or something. Well, keep it to 1 or 2 step instructions that they're not likely to get confused if they're distractible. And in the consistency between, you often find that one parent, I'll take the traditional thing, it can be the reverse, but let's say the father is from a traditional background and tough, and he believes in discipline, and there's trouble because the mother isn't firm enough with the kid. Okay, so that's his perspective. You got the mother who loves up the child and is giving her or him positive attention and something he's not getting enough of relationship building and affection. So she says he's mean, he's too tough. And you're probably not going to change those two people totally. But what you can do is you can move them a bit. So you can get the mother to become a little bit more firm and consistent, and the father to become a little bit more flexible and kind. So one will lighten up where the other tightens up, right? You need that approach. Because friends are such an issue, you know from our sessions that Amber was never invited to birthday parties, never invited to a single school birthday party. And it was her own fault, but you know, she didn't understand that. And not allowed to go on a lot of field trips. She very lonely for a child. So I think it's our job at home and at schools to look and find friends. It's terribly lonely going through life with no friends, and it's dangerous. Well, just think, I don't want to be an alarmist, but think of the shooters who come into campuses and schools, and you hear, oh, they had no friends, they were nerds, they didn't fit in, they're all these terrible things. This can have repercussions. So I would even in, let's say you're in grade 2 and you've got an ADHD kid, there is going to be some kind, empathic child in that class that if you explain it carefully, you know, the level they would understand, will try and help. There'll be kids, you can structure your groups accordingly. You can, you know, we had one guidance counselor who got annoyed with us when we asked about friendship because she said, that finding friends isn't her job. But I beg to differ. I think it's so important that it's everybody's job. And the parents, you can't believe what we did. I mean, we put in a swimming pool, and I at the time I didn't swim. I didn't want a swimming pool, but it bought friends. Andy would buy cookies and candy. She bought friends at recess, Amber did. And you don't want to be going through life buying friends, but if you don't have anything, it can be a start to something. And then if you can follow up on those interactions. So that's critical. And along with it is long-term planning. And I was starting to get at this and I lost my train of thought, but long-term planning is a big thing. A child doesn't become ADHD overnight. In its various forms, it changes, it shifts. You're a hyper kid maybe, but then they have been in that condition for years and years. It's not going to disappear. A lot of at-risk behavior doesn't disappear immediately. So it takes a long time to get to a certain state. You can expect it to take a fair amount of time to intervene. So if I were having in the school to talk about a communication meeting when the parents are there, and you've got a child in grade 4 going on to grade 5, I wouldn't be sitting there with the grade 5 teacher alone. I'd be asking the teacher from last year came in with the parents, the teacher from grade 6, 2 years ahead, because they should be planning ahead of time and interacting. So you make long-term plans so that when things don't go well, because there's so many disappointments. Amber was failed biology 3 times in one school in high school. And the biology teacher was chastising us. He was admonishing us. He was annoyed because he's not working hard enough. But he didn't have our perspective on it. When you've been told, as we were told, that your child is functionally illiterate, so disabled they will never learn to read. One diagnosed her as, one psychiatrist, as a schizophrenic, and she should be put into a special school like forever. And one principal told us she was the baddest of the bad. Not just the baddest child in the school, but the baddest child in the entire school district since the beginning of time. And so that was, you know, and there were positive things. So you're dealing with all kinds of situations like that. So you have to, somebody has to be bringing good stuff. There has to be a place of safety. That's what I think the home is. And if Amber failed biology, we never thought she was going to get to high school. We were still celebrating the fact she got out of junior high. We had time. And she finally went to university, but she started at 25. It took, you know, often ADHD individuals turn their lives around later in life. And that's what happened there. Other things that I could, well, let me mention a few more because I guess it's important. One of the things I think you got to try and do is maintain the essence of the child. Okay, so now I was partly responsible for not doing this because when I came on the scene, it was embarrassing. I mean, everywhere Amber went, every day at school was Hiroshima revisited. She was so disruptive. And, you know, I didn't want her to do that. So I tried to tighten up and so that I'd be more firm. But then I came to the conclusion, there's a quote, I don't know who said it, but said, don't try to teach a pig to sing. It won't work. And besides, you annoy the pig. And that's what I thought was going to happen with Amber. I didn't want to destroy what was there. The same if you give medication. Well, okay, but you want to balance the medication that you still have your child. You don't want to overdo it so it becomes zombie-like. You know, there's balance and everything. Talent spotting, we need to look for talents. It's always easier if there's some good things to build on, start there before you go after the deficits. So okay, so often in ADHD, nobody ever looks at the talent because life is a matter of day-to-day survival. You're just trying to get through another day with this kid. The kids and everything you're doing is focused on problem solving and issues, not talent development. If you can shift that thinking and recast reality, we call it, and just look for talents, change the message there, it does a lot of things. And Amber, who couldn't read, at the end of grade 3, nothing. She was terrible, but we took our time. Even though we were told she would be functionally illiterate and never read, she now reads Shakespeare. She writes beautiful poetry. She does those things. She's an interesting little artist with ideas and a fabulous teacher. All those things from nobody thought there was any ability there at all. And so that can come out. And also being kind, just get people to be kind. You know, it's so simple. Like we talk about all these things. We're going to use creative problem solving or life space crisis intervention or anger management or whatever it is. But being kind is a strategy too. Caring matters. Relationship building is crucial. That you don't want to be so focused on the behavior that you lose the need for emotional stability. And another technique is basically simple, but it's amazing how it works. Let them help. If you want to teach kids about responsibility and want them to feel good about their generosity and to interact, let them help. But it can't be phony. It has to be a genuine help in real situation, or if it isn't quite real, constructed in the way that it's meaningful for the kid and it seems real. So Amber had one teacher, when Amber got a little bit rambunctious and antsy, the teacher would just go over, tap her on the shoulder, try and maintain physical contact. But if Amber was spinning, what she did is she just wrote a note and made Amber the note runner. So it was a note for the principal. So the Amber, who never got to help, never got to do anything, right? Well, it was a big deal for her to run this note to Mrs. Phillipson, the principal. And Mrs. Phillipson would look at it, and sometimes it was only Amber. I mean, it was really nothing. But she thanks Amber. The teachers had a little respite. Amber has run and moved and feels important. Nothing's lost, and there's all sorts of ways to encourage help. I saw years ago, there was a flood, or almost a flood, in Winnipeg, and I was with my dad, and I'm not as altruistic as he was, but he was helping along the street, throwing the sandbags, right, and protecting the homes. So I was there because I felt guilty, so we went. But in came a bus from one of the schools in Winnipeg, and it was clearly a bus of challenged students, special ed students, we would have called them before. And it was very, wondered what was happening, but they poured off that bus. And for kids, you could tell they didn't get much chance to help, and they were helping, they were working, they threw those sandbags, they became annoying because they worked right through my coffee break. I mean, I had to keep going to keep up with these kids who you could see them blossoming with helping. So those are all sort of fuzzy recommendations, perhaps, but taken together, they add up to a lot.
And I think, Amber was a lucky person because she has you, and also you managed to contribute that much to her life.
Well, I was pleased, but the beginning, although it was difficult with Andy, they had their moments, but when Amber got married, Andrea was the bridesmaid. And Christopher, who people forget about the siblings, how hard it can be, because Amber would lose things, steal his toys, lie, make a fool of herself in school. But Chris was always her defender. And as you know, Chris is a very strong young man, and it's a good thing he was, because he had to be defending Amber. So it was a family. And the grandparents on both sides she had for a long time, and that was wonderful. So it was a whole familial attack on this disorder. It was like going after the pandemic, COVID-19. We have a target, and we're the vaccination. And it worked out well. I mean, she's still a pain, but she's in a career making a contribution, and we're happy with the way it worked out.
And do you remember when you introduced her to the international audience in the conference? You remember how she behaved? And really, she was amazing, to talk in that way, and then you can explain it. Because when you give them the right platform, you give them the right encouragement, they can achieve.
No, that was amazing. I'm fairly casual in my presentations. I mean, I prefer an informal setting, but I like to have some idea of what the hell I'm going to say. Amber just walks in. We've had audiences of like 1,200 people, and she has no idea. She just goes in and she just goes. And that's a talent that I wish I had. But it really is a I don't know. It's made my life exciting, and you've hit on something important with that, because as a family, we try to travel together. You know that I mean, sometimes I have to go by myself, but usually Andy's with me, or Amber or Chris, or all of the above, or our grandchildren. And it's really quite, I've got a light here. I see let's see if that helps. I look wonderful. But it really is just astounding to see her. And one of the things I get back when I travel with Amber, she is so childlike, but so hyper and I see things I never dreamed of in the places that I'm at. You see things through the eyes of excitement and joy, and she's gave me a new lease on life. I could have been in danger of becoming an old curmudgeon psychologist, and instead with the kids and the grandkids, and Amber and Chris leading the way, it's been tremendous opportunity for living. So they've enriched my life.
As a psychologist, how could you explain her way of thinking?
Well,
you know, just to compare and, you know, with other kids who are similar or something like this.
Yeah,
yeah.
Again, it matters. It's a hard one because, you see, like in all of this, I don't want you to think that we view Amber as perfect. Amber was trouble. Amber was very, very difficult. She's gone through a lot in her life that we weren't able to protect her from. And people, and as she got older and, you know, leaving home and doing things, I mean, but I think one of the things that may set us apart a bit is we're going to be there, right? No matter what, good or bad. So, and I'm sure Amber talks about this, so she won't mind me saying it. But a couple of years back, she went drinking. She was having a problem with alcohol, and she got drunk and arrested and put in the drunk tank. So there she is, and I managed to find out where she was. And when they let her out of the drunk tank, I was there. And no blaming. This has happened. Now how are we going to fix this and build upon it? And people are blessed who they have that. And it comes both ways. I mean, that could also be if I were in difficulty, I know people would be there. So I think that's one differentiation. But the other is Amber really is altruistic. She really does love helping. She loves little kids. She loves pets. I mentioned before we started her pet pig, pet cats all over the place, dogs. And when she was little, animals were her only friends. And she's got that, but now it's graduated and they've got these animals with the kids at school. And she really she just loves her students. And she's in what they call an LAC class, learning assistance class, with kids with exceptionalities and challenges. And she just embraces that. Amber never got to go on field trips. If there's a bad kid in the school, you know, who's a kid who's been bad in the school, and it was going to miss the field trip, Amber will take them. Everybody goes. She'll manage it. And she is so compassionate and understanding of kids with autism, and building relationships, people who they said kids they couldn't build relationships with. Yeah, watch her. Just watch what happens in a year with Amber. So I think those things are part of it, but it's not, I don't know how to explain this, but it really isn't simple. You're looking for a balance in all things at all times. Something came into my head, though it's not totally related, but let's just say, I'll try and make the example fit. Let's just say you've got a boy in grade 4, 2 boys in grade 4. One is learning disabled and ADHD, so combine the comorbid thing with the 2 problems. And the other kid is just simply sort of lazy, disorganized, and not caring about school. So it comes time at the end of grade 4 to see who's going to pass into grade 5. Now look at the trouble you can get into. But it may be everybody thinks, well, the stronger kid who's stronger academically, the boy who's not working hard, should go ahead. But that kid may benefit more from being behind because he's got things to clean up and there could work and build in some skills that he missed but he's capable of getting. If I were the coordinator of special services with the ADHD LD kid who's going to have that problem, whatever grade he's in, no sense retaining, might as well move him ahead. So, because you're going to be doing individualized programming all the way through. However, one more counterpoint, let's say the ADHD LD boy has a father who says this kid has to be retained because the school has caused all this trouble by passing them on and moving them on, so we have to retain and straighten this out, even though it's not going to work. We're going to do that. Well, the right decision to me is to move that kid ahead. But if the father is so against it, and all the kid's life they're going to hear these complaints and this echoing, maybe what's right isn't right, given the circumstances. So, and that's the way it happens with ADHD and many, many exceptionalities. In general, you have to individualize because the dynamics are never the same. And the environment is never the same. Schools aren't the same, the interests, everything. So you look at things in a complex world and you try to simplify it and make everything fit.
And as you said, we cannot do we cannot make any progress without the right treatment. But what about, the percentage of people who did manage?
Sorry, Kazir, I've just had a hearing aid die on me.
No problem. I repeat, I said that, yeah, they can make good progress if they are treated very well. But up to what percentage, of people who have ADHD, they make progress?
Okay, well, there are some interesting writers who talk about managing the ADHD in the workplace.
Yes.
Okay. And let me do two pieces of work. There is a study from years ago now, I'm dated in this one, but two researchers followed ADHD kids through childhood and then watched their progress through adolescence and early adulthood. So it was a longitudinal study. And they found that the ADHD kids that were growing up were more likely to have trouble in school, more likely to be retained once, and actually more likely to be retained twice. And if you're retained twice, you're more likely to get into all sorts of trouble. They were likely to have social emotional problems, more likely to run afoul of the law. And as they got older, they did. And not all of them, of course, but a disproportionate number of the ADHD people ran into trouble. Well, and their conclusion was ADHD, the prognosis for ADHD is far from benign. There's very dangerous things. And remember, I mentioned the other psychologist who looked at behavior and say that you have to be unhappy emotionally to be diagnosed. So that's a reality. And for a lot of people, that's the way it goes. But I don't think it has to be that way. I think that if people, a lot of good people do good things for a long time, you can turn that around and have much more optimistic outcomes. And there are many people who have the supports and who, in effect, do that. And they become very contributing members of society, let us say. So like Amber teaching, but there's many, as I say, books written about people using their ADHD in a positive way in their workplaces, in their schools, and so on. But so I guess with any individual, only time will tell.
And sometimes you call them gifted, sometimes you consider them disabled.
Yeah, that's true. And but there is, okay, you know, you've hit on another point, the double exceptionality thing, where, and it's what I said earlier, see, some people have said, and I don't know if I agree with this or not, but they argue that the ADHD, people with ADHD are more likely to be creative or gifted. Okay, because there's some parallel characteristics there. I'm not sure that's the case. What I think is there are talented, gifted people in all areas, and autistic and various areas. And what happens is the ADHD kids, because of that focus on problems, people miss the talent. So when you start to look, you find a whole bunch of them, but it's just because their talents have been missed. Nobody's really been searching, but some of them can make amazing contributions. And well, you know, in Temple Grandin in autism and her contributions, we have some of our students who have graduated from our programs with autism, with ADHD, with disabilities, who have done exceedingly well. I mean, but it's certainly not everybody.
Yeah. Is there any link between autism and ADHD?
I think that I've more or less covered this here. I don't think there's anything. I'm going to think about a bunch of things as soon as we sign off, of course. Oh, yeah. But I think that covers this pretty well. I'm again, I've got to be careful because, in one sense, my comments are based on an N of 1, right? I mean, it's a case study. It's Amber. That's it. But bearing in mind that our team has worked with scores of ADHD kids pretty intensively, I think we've got a fair idea of that. And so I guess I'll close by saying that, you know, there's no magic. Anybody who comes along and tells you they have the program or they have the answer, you know, by definition, they're wrong. The world it just isn't that simple. And what works at one time may not work for another. What works for one person may not work for another, and so on. So the individualizing, I think, is critical. But it still pays, I believe, to know the literature of ADHD and the characteristics and all the things, so we have the broad knowledge. But then you don't implement that or put that into place willy-nilly. You put it into place judiciously, and you choose carefully what fits the person you're dealing with.
And could we consider, Amber's case as one of the longitudinal studies? If we take it in this way,
yeah,
over a long period of time.
Yeah, you could think of it that way, because what Andy was dealing with this from birth. So this kid, she was a baby who slept very little. So and she's now in her mid-40s, middle-aged, I don't believe it. And we've traced that all out through an awful lot of ups and downs. And one of the things that is part of the pattern, I think, is once we celebrate and we think things are perfect, some awful thing happens again. So you have to be in it for the long haul. Mm-hmm. It's not something that you can just fix. But anyway, as I said before, for me, it was life-changing for all of us. And that's why you see Disney. People wonder why I'm always in the Mickey Mouse garb. And I don't think I've ever even mentioned to you, but as I say, when Amber was little and I saw her there, even though I was on the scene and part of things, it took me a while to work up the courage to pop the question. So Amber would have been 6 or 7, just in there, when Andy and I got married. And just before we got married in 1983, in 82, at Christmas, we took the kids to Disney World, and they had never had opportunities to do anything like that. So we've made traveling a priority. They loved it so much. They saw these things. It was so great, and it changed our family. It became a guidepost for happiness. So we go back often, and we've traveled a lot, and it's not because we have the means, but not, we're not wealthy. We have to plan to do it. But I myself last year, or the year before, finished, I saw my last wonder of the world. I've seen them all, and many other things. Many because of ICIE, but opportunities have surfaced, and we've tried to bring those opportunities as we get them when possible to the kids and the grandkids, and now great grandkids, and that is it. But you never go back quite the same. And Disney, that was the first trip, and that was the first wonderful experience, and that stayed with them forever. And now Amber wants to save money and take Chris and Andy and I to Disney again for the 30th time. But anyway.
Yeah, I am very happy to have this, conversation with you to shed light on this aspect of your contributions, because many people knows you in giftedness, creativity, and in particular in psychology in general, because of your international contribution. So maybe this is the first time we are talking about this topic.
Yeah, I haven't done it often. It's mostly been ICIE or nothing. So, but maybe we're changed that a bit. Now I've got a little bit more time. I've stepped down as dean, and after a long run of over 16 years, so I've getting a little bit old for that, but I've gone half-time, which is leaving me half-time to do, I hope, some exciting things that I hope I'm not too old for. So
No. And what is your plan? Maybe this is the last question now. What is your plan when it comes to writing about ADHD, or as you said, you would like to write the second version of the book, which is unique, I mean, in this field of knowledge.
well, you know, the way I look, I really do want to write. Over the years, I've written a lot, but it's been most of it rushed because I've had a real job where I've had to be doing, you know, and a lot of responsibility with the coordinator's job in the school and with the deans and university, and we're a fairly good sized faculty of education. There's a lot going on. So I'm looking forward to, now this pandemic, like with everybody, has interrupted a few things, but I'm hoping in the new year I'm going to start to write with a vengeance. And what I have in mind is not separating things. I like looking at things connected. So I was thinking, but we'll talk about it later, I hope, but I was thinking of maybe a 4-book set where one of them is the ADHD, but then one is gifted and talented, one is the behavior on at risk, and one is that organizational tone for remediation, and just put those in a package, and that's all books. And maybe if I can get my colleague and friend Don Ambrose to join me, and maybe Kevin Lamoureux, maybe another one on the Doubtful Gift, my old gifted book from the 80s. I may try and rework that. And if we had those, I would say that would be finish up my contributions, and that should keep me busy for a while. But I'm excited now to get the chance and the time to put pen to paper, or I guess mouse to pad, and get this done.
Thank you so much, Ken. We are so proud of you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the opportunities, not just for me, but if I think of people, I'm going to miss people, but I think of Phil Baker, Alan Weed, Joe Goulet, Kevin Lamoureux, Leonard Glade, very importantly, Karen Magville, and the journal, and so many things. Mike Birdsgard, where you have provided opportunities for all those people to see things, do things, and make presentations, do writing, and make connections they would have never made. So the thanks should be coming from our way.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And take care. We're done.